Hello and welcome to The Understudy, the channel that teaches you everything about musical theater. My name is Philippa, and today I will read from Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time by Ken Bloom and Frank Blasnick. To get the full version of the book, I recommend getting the physical copy as images and certain inserts from the book won't be displayed here. I do not own this material, I'm just reading from a place of entertainment and education, and I will not edit these audio recordings as I go, so you will get the unabridged version. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Opened December 8, 1949 at the Ziegfeld Theatre with 740 performances. Produced by Herman Levin and Oliver Smith. Book by Joseph Fields and Anita Loos. Music by Jules Stein. Lyrics by Leo Robin. Adapted from the novel by Anita Loos. Dance arrangements by Trude Whitman. Vocal arrangements by Hugh Martin. Music director Milton Rosenstock. Music arranged by Don Walker. Staged by John C. Wilson. Choreographed by Agnes DeMille. Production design by Oliver Smith. Costume design by Miles White and lighting design by Peggy Clark. Synopsis. It's the 1920s, an era of flappers and gold diggers, and the ultimate good time girl is Lorraine Lee from Little Rock. Her sugar daddy is the Button King, Gus Esmond. Lorelei's friend Dorothy Shaw acts as a chaperone on a transatlantic cruise since Gus is too busy with buttons. Lorelei, who espouses the philosophy that diamonds are a girl's best friend, Dorothy comes in second, uses her wiles on Sir Francis Beekman and borrows $5,000 to buy a diamond tiara from his wife. After the ship docks, Lorelei discovers many sights, chiefly Joseph Gage, a physical fitness nut, and Zipper King. Gus arrives in Paris only to find Lorelei in the enemy camp, sporting a zipper on her gown. After giving a spectacular performance in a Parisian nightclub, Lorelei gets Gus. Gus merges his business with Josephus, and Dorothy hooks up with the millionaire Henry Spofford. Cast: Dorothy Shaw, Yvonne Adair, Henry Spofford, Eric Brotherson, Lorelei Lee, Carol Channing. Dancer: Charles Honey Coles. Sir Francis Beekman, Rex Evans. Josephus Cage, George S. Irving. Gus Esmond, Jack Macaulay. Mr. Esmond Sr., Irving Mitchell. Louis Lemontor, Howard Morris. Mrs. Ella Spofford, Alice Pierce. Lady Phyllis Beekman, Rita Shaw. Diminutive, in height only, novelist Anita Loos created flapper Lorelei Lee in her 1925 novel Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, first serialized in Harper's Bazaar. The book was an immediate sensation, and producer Florence Ziegfeld approached Loos to adapt her novel into a Broadway musical. But Ziegfeld's rival, all other producers were Ziegfeld's rivals, Edgar Selwyn, had already signed Loos to write a straight play adaptation. The play opened in 1926 with June Walker creating the part of Lorelei. Ruth Taylor played the lead in the 1928 silent film version. After repeated tries, director John C. Wilson convinced Anita Loos to begin work on the musical version of her hit play. Meanwhile, scenic designer and sometimes producer Oliver Smith was sailing across the Atlantic when he ran into the publisher Jack Robbins. Smith mentioned that it would be a good idea to turn Gentlemen Prefer Blondes into a musical. While Robbins was in Europe, he let his friend Jules Stein stay at his Essex House apartment while Stein got situated back in New York after a long sojourn in Hollywood. Robbins arrived home and suggested that Stein contact Smith. The show began to gather momentum once Stein, Smith, Loos, and Wilson signed on. Smith brought in Herman Levin as a co-producer. Loos selected Joseph Fields for help with the libretto, and Stein chose Leo Robin as his lyricist. The songwriters came up with the first song, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. As Stein and Robin worked on the score, Lewin began raising the money. It was slow in coming until Billy Rose, owner of the Ziegfeld Theatre, which needed a tenant, invited Leland Hayward, Richard Rogers, Oscar Hammerstein, and Joshua Logan, were to hear Jules Stein play the score. They were so enthusiastic, they each agreed to pony up $5,000, and once word got out that the master of musical had given their approval, the rest of the money was raised on the next day. Still, there was no one signed for the lead role of Lorelei. It was assumed by all involved that the name actress would be cast, and Dolores Gray and Gertrude Nielsen were among those who auditioned. Then Jules Stein saw a little Broadway review, Lend an Ear, and first laid eyes on Carol Channing. The following night he returned with Anita Loos in tow. Loos also flipped for Channing, realizing she could give some comic dimension to the dumb blonde Lorelei Lee. Yvonne Adair, also featured in Lend an Ear, was cast in the co-starring role of Dorothy. Once rehearsals began, the show quickly fell into shape, quite an achievement considering that both Leo Robin and Joseph Fields made their contributions by telephone and mail from California. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes has remained an especially vital property. The film musical version was released in 1953, and in 1974, Carol Channing returned to part in the revised version titled Lorelei. Comden and Green collaborated with Stein on some new inferior songs, and Kenny Solms and Gail Parent supplied a new libretto, bookending the show as a flashback for the now 50-something Channing. Still, it managed to run 320 performances on Broadway. Less successful was a revival of the original musical that originated at the Goodspeed Opera House, squeaking out only 32 performances in 1995. Still, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes enjoys myriad productions around the country as a mainstay of the American musical theater. Oliver Smith, one of the most gifted and prolific scenic designers in history, began his Broadway career with the operetta Rosalinda in 1942. In addition to designing for ballet, opera, and film, his best-known creations were the beautiful atmospheric drops and sumptuous set pieces for such legendary musicals as Brigadoon, My Fair Lady, West Side Story, Hello Dolly, and Camelot. Widely regarded as the most opulent show ever, his career was astounding, encompassing 10 Broadway shows in the 1964-65 season alone, including such scenically demanding ones as Baker Street, Ben Franklin in Paris, Bajor, and the flops of flops, Kelly. Also carving out a career as producer, he often wore two hats, both as producer and designer of shows such as On the Town, Billion Dollar Baby, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. He was involved in the American Ballet Theater, beginning with his co-conception of On the Town in 1944. The following year, he became co-director of ABT along with Louisa Chase, a position he retained until 1980. Carol Channing. Bizarre yet familiar, gawky yet graceful, outrageously comical yet oddly touching. Carol Channing is one of those performers you have just got to see to understand. And once you've seen her, you may never be the same. Discovered by Marge and Gower Champion, she made her debut in the review Lend an Ear, where her sketch comedy of the 1920 musical spoof The Gladolia Girl provided her with such Sacco material that she continues to use it to this day. Rocketing into the stratosphere with her comedy comment as Lorelei Lee in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she became the toast of New York for her wide-eyed innocence, expert timing, and loony vocals. After she replaced, quite unsuccessfully, Rosalind Russell's in Wonderful Town and the flopper Root the Vamp, skeptics began to wonder if Channing was a one-off, too unique ever to score as any character other than Lorelei. She proved them all wrong. As the original Dolly Gallagher Levi, Channing became the one against whom all subsequent actresses would be judged. Backstage, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes has had one set of orchestrations in the theater and another for the original cast album. Girl Crazy opened October 14th, 1930 at the Alvin Theater with 272 performances. Produced by Alex A. Aarons and Wynton Freedley. Music by George Gershwin, lyrics by Ira Gershwin, book by Guy Bolton and John McGowan. Staged by Alexander Leftwich, choreographed by George Hale. Music director, Earl Bubsby. Orchestrations, Robert Russell Bennett. Settings by Donald Owens Lager. Costumes, Kiliette. Synopsis. At the behest of his father, New York bon vivant Dandy Churchill goes west by taxi. Danny doesn't especially want to give up the poultry-dunious pleasures of the big city, but Daddy holds the big purse strings. So Danny does what any red-blooded American boy would do. He turns Clusterville, Arizona, into Gotham Light. But he ends up finding true love with simple Molly Gray rather than with Kate Fothergill, the daughter of the town's saloon owner, and a distaffed version of the old Danny. Cast: Danny Churchill, Aline Kearns. Molly Gray, Ginger Rogers. Gibo Goldfarb, Willie Howard. Flora James, Eunice Healy. Kate Fothergill, Ethel Merman. Slick Fothergill, William Kent. Jake Howell, Lou Parker. Red Nichols and his orchestra, the foursome. When George Gershwin stepped up to the podium on the opening night of Girl Crazy, Broadwayites were expecting just another musical comedy. As librettist Jack McGowan later stated, "We didn't do George justice." The cast was nothing special. Willie Howe was a well-known comedian but hardly a star, and he inhabited a role written for Bert Lahr, who was stuck in the unexpected hit Flying High and was unable to escape his contract. Female lead Ginger Rogers had appeared in only one other show, to middling acclaim. The juvenile lead, Aline Kearns, was a good, dependable performer, but not much more. Yes, the Gershwin score was excellent, especially as conducted on opening night by none other than the composer himself. And on stage, making her Broadway debut, a stenographer from Queens. The comedy lass had auditioned for Guy Bolton, Bert Calmer, and Harry Ruby for the musical Top Speed. But Calmer was concerned that he was too damn loud. So she took an engagement at the Brooklyn Paramount where producer Wynton Friedley was taking with her voice. He took her to meet the Gershwins, who liked that she sang too loud, and they wrote songs for her. Oh yes, the neophyte singer was named Ethel Merman. Bolton and Jack McGowan beefed her up her part, but the Gershwins wisely didn't give her anything to sing until almost an hour into the show. As Ira Gershwin explained it, although this young woman was appearing for the first time on any stage, her assurance, timing, and delivery, both as a comedian and singer, with a no-nonsense voice that could reach not only standees but ticket takers in the lobby, convinced the opening night audiences that it was witnessing the discovery of a new star. Overnight stardom is one of the most enduring cliches of the theater, but it does happen very, very rarely. Those who come to mind are Gwen Verdon in Can-Can, Edith Adams in Wonderful Town, and Eartha Kitt in New Faces of 1952. Harry Belafonte's appearance in John Mary Anderson's Almanac made him a singing star. Still, it's our gal Ethel who remains the epitome of an overnight sensation. She had appeared in a couple of nightclubs and, during rehearsals of Girl Crazy, took an engagement at the Palace Theater. But it was her appearance at the Alvin Theater singing I Got Rhythm that launched her 50-year career. Backstage, Jazz creates Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Red Nichols, Gene Krupa, Jimmy Dorsey, and Jack Teagarden all performed in the pit band of Girl Crazy. Alex Aarons brought in Fred Astaire to beef up the choreography. When they got to Embraceable You, Fred showed some steps to Ginger Rogers. It was the first time they danced together. Ethel Merman, stenographer from Astoria and the queen of them all, had more than just a voice like a car alarm, more than just a wisecrack at every turn of the plot, more than just an arm to be flung to the heavens with every note held to kingdom come. Merman had it. that undefiable quality that is seldom experienced and can't be manufactured. Sure, some of her shows were fairly silly, Red, Hot, and Blue, Something for the Boys, and some were merely good instead of legendary, Stars in Your Eyes, Panama Hattie. But she was the she was in only one true stinker, Happy Hunting, and her presence alone kept it running for years. Her last original role, the monumental Gypsy, provided her with a role that was, for once, not overflowing with the unwavering self-confidence for which she had become famous. Rose experienced moments of terror, anger, sadness, and loss. Most of all, she had self-doubt, something that never crossed the mind of Reno Sweeney, Sally Adams, or Nils Duquesne. Knowing she had the role of her career, Merman ran with it, playing the entire Broadway run, even heading the national tour, something she rarely did. After that, there was nothing left to prove. She turned down all offers of new shows, claiming she wasn't interested. Perhaps bored, perhaps worn down by the constant questions, she finally relented and agreed to be the last Dolly Levi of Hello Dolly's original Broadway run. Far more complex personality than many believed, she wavered between a filthy sense of humor and a deeply traditional streak. The subject of the most hilarious and mostly unprintable stories in the Broadway history, there will truly never, ever be another like her. Good news. Opened September 6, 1927 at the Shannon's 46th Street Theater with 551 performances. Produced by Lawrence Schwab and Frank Mandel. Music by Ray Henderson. Lyrics by B.G. De Silva and Lou Brown. Book by Lawrence Schwab and B.G. De Silva. Directed by Edgar McGregor. Musical numbers staged by Bobby Connolly. Settings designed by Donald Onslager. Frocks designed by Kvyat. Conducted by Alfred Goodman. Advice in football technique by Knut Rockne. Synopsis. Will star football player Tom Merlot play in the big game despite flunking astronomy? Constance Lane tutors him so he'll pass the test, win the game, and get the girl, Constance. And that's exactly what happens. Cast. Tom Marlowe, John Prince Jones. Bobby Randall, Gus Shy. Pooch Kearney, John Sheenan. Patricia Bingham, Shirley Vernon. Constance Lane, Mary Lauer. Babe O'Day, Ines Courtney. Sylvester, Dom Tompkins. Millie, Ruth Mahan. Flo, Selma O'Neill. The Glee Club Trio. Bob Bryce, Fran Frey, Bob Borger. Orchestra leader, George Olson. Theater is ephemeral, like Brigadoon. It returns out of the mist 8 times a week and then disappears forever. The productions and performers live on, a few bootleg videos aside, solely in memories of the audiences. No man alive can tell us firsthand of the particular magic of the Ziegfeld Follies. Willie Howard, Julia Sanderson, or Faye Templeton. The shows are gone too, existing only in photographs, posters, and maybe an early recording, with newer generations of audiences increasingly embracing their own time only, with little regard for the past. B.G. De Silva, Lou Brown, and Ray Henderson, composers of Good News, were among the most successful writers in the 1920s and 30s. But today, apart from a handful of songs, they are forgotten. And the stars of Good News, Gus Shy, John Pryce Jones, Selma O'Neill, and Ines Courtney, have left a legacy of lists. Lists of their credits appear in Theater World and Best Plays on www.ibdb.com. But we don't know anything about their acting or singing. In fact, we don't know anything about them at all. Mary Lauer was a pretty big star in her time. The titles of the show in which she appeared give a sense of her talents. No No Nanette, Queen High, Cross My Heart, Hello Daddy, You Said It, and Good News, of course. None of these had cast albums, and Lawler, a minor figure in musical theater history, isn't mentioned in autobiographies. but we do know she wanted to grow up to be a nun or an actress, attending a convent where she couldn't help dancing. Upon being told she was going directly to hell, she quit the nunnery and entered show business. What went around came around, for after the smash opening of Good News, she was asked by those very same nuns to perform at their graduation ceremony. But go to Google, and there's only one reference to her for the film version of Good News. She's luckier than most performers in the 1930s in that she appeared in a film version of her stage hit, but still she's unknown today. Today's stars, Bernadette Peters, Patti LuPone, and Donna Murphy, will be remembered through videotapes, films, and recordings. Meanwhile, let's take a moment to remember Mary Lawler. She was just one of the reasons Good News was a success. The stock market was booming, for a while anyway, and American cities were growing at a previously unknown pace. The energy of the cities was reflected in every aspect of the Jazz Age. For the first time, a sizable number of children had the opportunity to enter college, and all things collegiated became faddish. Youth was everything, and Good News reflected the enthusiasm of flaming youth. Critic Burns Mantle wrote the cast. They sway from the hips, they wear their trousers baggy and their panties short. They sing with raucous abandon and dance like all get out. They rah-rah with gusto. They are very collegiate. Oh, very. Though Good News espoused modernity, the popularity of the shows was based on the age-old values of the hit song, The Best Thing in Life Are Free, and Just Imagine. That might have been Flaming Youth and The Varsity Drag that propelled Good News, but at heart it was a simple story of boy meets girl. It's telling that when the first film version was made by MGM, Zelma O'Neill, the irrepressible energy that fueled The Varsity Drag, wasn't cast. Rather, shy, demure good girl Mary Lawler was picked to reprise her role. Good News had one foot in the future and another firmly planted in homespun homilies. Backstage, Usher wearing leather sweaters led audiences to their seat. Even before the overture, George Olsen marched his band down the aisles of the 46th Street Theater, beckoned in leather sweaters and cheering for Tate College. B.G. De Silva, Leg Brown, and Ray Henderson. The songwriters B.G. Buddy De Silva, Lou Brown, and Ray Henderson are the most underappreciated of all major Broadway tunesmiths. Their shows were so rooted in their flapper era that they have failed to transcend time. In fact, the three together and separately wrote some of Broadway's most enduring standards, including It All Depends on You, Lucky Day, The Birth of the Blues, The Best Thing in Life Are Free, Lucky in Love, You're the Cream in My Coffee, and Button Up Your Overcoat. When De Silva left the team, his partners continued with Life is Just a Bowl of Cherries, and The Thrill is Gone. Aside from his work with Brown and Henderson, De Silva collaborated on such Jolson standards as Avalon, April Showers, and California Here I Come. With Victor Herbert, De Silva produced A Kiss in the Dark, and with Jerome Kern, the enduring Look for the Silver Lining. George Gershwin provided the music for De Silva's lyrics to I'll Build a Stairway to Paradise and the plaintive Somebody Loves Me. Among his other standards are If You Knew Susie, Edie Was a Lady, and You're an Old Smoothie. He went on to become an executive at Paramount Pictures and produced 4 hit musicals. Brown produced, co-wrote the libretti, and directed 3 Broadway shows. Grand Hotel opened November 12, 1989 at the Martin Beck Theatre with 1,017 performances. Produced by Martin Richards, Mary Lee Johnson, Sam Crothers, Sander Jacobs, Kenneth D. Greenblatt, Paramount Pictures Corporations, and Jushaminson Theaters. Booked by Luther Davis. Music and lyrics by Robert Wright and George Forrest. The additional music by Maury Geaston and Wally Warper. Additional lyrics by Maury Geaston. Based on Grand Hotel by Vicky Baum. Music orchestrated by Peter Matz. Musical and vocal director Jack Lee. Directed and choreographed by Tommy Tune. Scenic design by Tony Walton. Costume design by Santo Loquasto. Lighting design by Jules Fisher. Synopsis. The scene is Berlin in 1928. Through the revolving doors of the Grand Hotel enters a varied cast of characters. Colonel Dr. Otterschlag has seen it all from his perch in the lobby of the Grand Hotel. Checking in are Elizaveta Grushinskaya, a ballerina afraid of her advancing years, Felix von Gagern, her dashing lover who is also a jewel thief, Otto Krangeline, a sweet, nebbishy man who visits the hotel for one last fling before his imminent death, and General Director praising with his secretary Flammenschen, who dreams of fame in Hollywood. Fate has brought them together at the hotel, and they will find themselves interacting in surprising ways. Cast: Colonel Dr. Otterschlag, John Wiley. Rona, Rex D. Hayes. Front Desk, Bob Stillman. Zinowitz, Hal Robinson. General Director praising, Tony Jerome. Flamchen, Jane Krakowski. Otto Kringelane, Michael Jeter. Rafaela, Karen Akers. Elizaveta Grushinskaya. Lilane Montevecchi. Felix von Gagern. David Carroll. Along with Dreamgirls, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, and Tommy Tune's other visual extravaganza, 9. Grand Hotel was one of the truly towering directional achievements of the last 25 years, with music and dialogue flowing seamlessly and, above all, visual elements coordinated so perfectly that an auteur of Tune's talent not been in control of audience's focus, one might not have known where to look. So rich was the storytelling. Based more on Vicky Baum's original book than the MGM Garbo Barrymore's Crawford opus, it had the longest gestation period of any Broadway musical, over 30 years from an out-of-town closing to a triumphant resurrection on Broadway. Originally titled At the Grand, it opened and closed on the West Coast in 1958, directed by Albert Marr and starring legendary actor Paul Muni. Marr's wife, the ample Joan Diner, and film star Cesar Danova. Songwriters Robert Wright and George Forrest believed the piece had never received its due, and Tune took the project on, restoring the action from At the Grand Rome setting to the original Berlin location. The diva leading lady in the first version, an opera star a la Callas, reverted to fading ballerina in Grand Hotel, allowing former Roland Petit dancer Liliane Montevecchi to dance and point after a 30-year hiatus. After a workshop in the old Diplomat Hotel with Tune incorporating the mirrored pillars of the dilapidated ballroom into the floor plan of the set, plans were made for a full production. During the Boston run, as the tapestry of the song, dialogue, and dance began to take shape, Tune called in friend and 9 composer Maury Yeston to supplement Wright's and Forrest's score, much to the disappointment of the original authors. Originally only asked to contribute a few songs, most importantly a ballad from the golden voiced David Carroll, Yeston agreed to join the project only if he were allowed to write at least one number for each of the 6 principals. All told, he wrote 11 new songs, sometimes retaining Wright's and Forrest's verse, sometimes just a snatch of the original. Word from out of town was that Tune had a disaster on his hand, and as the cast never played the same show twice, even through a long preview period at the Martin Beck, but those in the But those in the show knew that they had something special, and Grand Hotel opened to mostly positive reviews, with raves for Toon's tour de force direction and choreography. The original cast of Grand Hotel contributed to its great appeal, with lovable Michael Yetter as the dying accountant Otto Kringelline, giving a transcendent performance, resuscitating his career, and delivering one of the most powerful Tony acceptance speeches ever. In addition, David Carroll struck a dashing romantic figure as the Baron, finally appearing in a hit show before his death. Jane Krakowski, in the role played by Joan Crawford, achieved much acclaim and validation as a major musical theater presence after a career as teen actress, with other principals Timmy Jerome and former Nine stars Montevecchi and Karen Akers all given elegant, shaded performances. It was a show with many unique touches. Seating the orchestrations on par with the master Jonathan Tunick's, were by Hollywood conductor Peter Matz in one of his rare forays on Broadway, on catwalks above the action. The sensational ballroom dance team of Yvonne Marceau and Pierre Delaine, and the joyful show-stopping Charleston by Jeter, Carroll, and company had some audiences members swearing that the lighter-than-air Jeter was dancing with the aid of unseen wires. To be sure, some snipped that the book was subpar and the score was a patchwork. Some thought the use of the morphine-addicted doctor or narrator a bit heavy-handed. Some found the scullery workers slamming their crates of cutlery noisy and unnecessary. But when the good things in a show are as good as Grand Hotel's, it becomes easy to overlook its shortcomings. Above all, it was Toon's show, with every possible location created using only chairs and a pole, held horizontally to represent locales as varied as a coffee bar and the ladies' room. With a ring of a bell, we were transported to the front desk, and the march downstage of three women carrying chairs signified the hotel switchboard. Its Spartan use of scenery was a triumph of Toon's imagination, flying in the face of lumbering spectacles of shows such as Starlight Express, Legs Diamond, and Meet Me in St. Louis, which opened the week before Grand Hotel. Finally, recorded 3 years after its opening, with the equally golden voice Brett Barrett filling in for David Carroll, its reputation as a directional masterpiece has grown in the intervening years. In addition, it was a show that, like Dreamgirls, improved greatly during its run. For shows that are woven so intricately need time to find their heart and rhythm. Backstage. 1989's Grand Hotel was the first American musical since 1983's La Cage Falls to run over 1,000 performances. MGM musical star Zid Charis made her belated Broadway debut at the age of 71 as replacement for Lillian Montevecchi. Tommy Tune. 6 feet 6 inches of show businessman acumen, made his way through the Broadway gauntlet with jobs in the shows Baker Street and A Joyful Noise. After a stint in Hollywood on The Dean Martin Show and the film of Hello Dolly, Tune went to Detroit as part of Michael Bennett's Seesaw doctoring team, replacing the supporting lead and choreographing his own show-stopping number, It's Not Where You Start. Finally achieving recognition as co-director-choreographer of The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which transferred to Broadway for a 3-year run, and he had subsequent successes with A Day in Hollywood, A Night in the Ukraine, Stunning 9, and Nin Thinning Save taking over as director of My One and Only. And after another out-of-town turnaround with Grand Hotel, where nearly every song was either replaced or entirely restaged during its Boston run, and the hit The Will Rogers Follies, Tune had a run of exceedingly bad luck, helming The Best Little Whorehouse Goes Public, Busker Alley, which closed after a long out-of-town tour, finally derailed by Toon's broken foot, and a staged version of Easter Parade, with a workshop starring Toon and Sandy Duncan, in a reportedly career-transforming performance that failed to reach fruition. Perhaps understandably soared by numerous disappointments, Toon spent 2 years making a king's ransom in Las Vegas review EFX. Now in his 60s and still intensely creative, he is eager awaited by the Broadway theater goers he has enriched and invigorated. Grease opened February 14, 1972 at the Broadhurst Theatre with 3,388 performances. Produced by Kenneth Weisman and Maxine Fox. Book, music, and lyrics by Jim Jacobs and Warren Casey. Musical director, Louis St. Louis. Music orchestrated by Michael Leonard. Dance and vocal arrangements by Louis St. Louis. Directed by Tom Moore. Musical numbers and dance staged by Patricia Birch. Scenic design by Douglas W. Schmidt. Costume design by Carrie F. Robbins and Carrie Robbins. Lighting design by Carl Eigsty. Synopsis. The fabulous 50s are about to come to an end, and students of Rydell High School are looking forward to their senior year. New to the school is the goody-goody Sandy Dombrowski, who spends the summer having a fling with the school's tough guy, Danny Zuko, the leader of the Burger Palace Boys. In spite of her Sandra D looks and demeanor, Sandy is recruited by the tough girl gang known as the Pink Ladies. How to fit in? She transforms herself into a greaser, wins Danny's heart, and the school year ends in exuberant celebration. Cast: Betty Rizzo, Adrienne Barbeau, Vince Fontaine, Don Billett, Roger, Walter Bobby, Sonny Lettieri, Jim Borelli, Danny Zuko, Barry Boswick, Duty, James Canning, Sandry Dabrowski, Carol DeMoss, Marty, Katie Hanley, Eugene Florzik, Tom Harris, Patty Simcox, Eileen Kristen, Miss Lynch, Dorothy Leon, Kenickie, Timothy Myers, Cha-Cha de Gregorio, Kathy Moss, John Casino and Teen Angel, Ellen Paul, Frenchie, Marva Small, Jan Garn Steffens. The first edition of this book caused some welcome controversy concerning shows that we included and shows that didn't make the cut grade. Not surprisingly, Sunday in the Park with George was the omission most readers brought to our attention. But it did surprise us that absolutely no one mentioned the exclusion of Grease from our original list. Rather, it was the recent, badly received reality television show Grease, You're the One That I Want, and the resulting, badly received Broadway revival of Grease that forced us to reconsider the show. Whether you think Grease is nostalgic crap or a brilliant look back at a more innocent time, the show is a true phenomenon. The original production was an immense hit. By the time it closed, it had become the longest-running musical in Broadway history and had spawned a number of future stars on stage and screen. The telefilm version was a smash in its own right, inspiring a sequel, unusual for film musicals. Aptly, if unimaginatively called Grease 2. The show was revived successfully in 1994, followed by 2007 by the aforementioned reality TV series and re-revival, still running as of this writing. And then there are thousands of amateur productions. The show has also been an international hit, playing to screaming audiences in London's West End and all over the world. Its original off-Broadway premiere was blessed by good timing in the proud tradition of Harvard's Hasty's putting shows, Princeton triangle shows, and University of Pennsylvania's WAMU shows, the Calliope shows. George University Masks and Bobble Dramatic Society presents the Calliope shows. The biggest success in their history was Senior Prom, a nostalgic musical book back at life in a Catholic high school in the 1950s. The show was such a smash that it transferred to the prestigious Washington Theater Club. Co-created and directed by the future Tony Award winner Jack Hofsis, the youngest director ever to win that award. It was soon optioned for Broadway. By all accounts, Senior Prom was a brilliant, hilarious, and tuneful show. Meanwhile, halfway across the country, in Chicago, a play with music titled Grease was playing at the Kingston Mines Theater. Two would-be Broadway producers, Ken Wiseman and Maxine Fox, liked the show so much they offered to produce it off-Broadway if the writers would turn it into a real musical. Grease's success off-Broadway in 1972 and its subsequent Broadway transfer that same year caused the demise of Senior Prom, which some still insist was the superior show. Packed with upcoming talent discovered by casting directors Jeffrey Johnson and Vinnie Liff, Grease's original Broadway cast and subsequent replacements included such future notables as Barry Bostwick, Adrienne Barbeau, Alan Paul, John Travolta, Judy Kaye, David Paymer, Patrick Swayze, Randy Graff, Treat Williams, Mindy Kennedy, Richard Gere, Eileen Graff, Peter Gallagher. Taxi stars Jeff Conaway and Maria Henner, and future directors Walter Bobby and Jerry Sachs. The show was written by Jim Jacobs and Warren Casey, and with it they enter the illustrious pantheon of one-hit wonders that includes Sherman Edwards, 1776, James Rado and Jerome Rogney, Hare, Lionel Bart, Oliver, Burt Bacharach and Hal Davies, Promises, and Robert Britton and Jude Walden, Raisin. Initially moving from the off-Broadway Eden Theater, a former Yiddish theater, to the Broadhurst, Grease then moved to the Royale Theater, finally taking up residence at the Majestic. Today, very few productions move from one theater to another. Only Beauty and the Beast, Les Miserables, and the current revival of Chicago come to mind. But in the golden age of theater, long-running shows often moved to smaller houses, affording new shows shot at a top Broadway venue. Funny Girl actually moved theaters during an out-of-town tryout in Philadelphia and also moved in New York. Cabaret, Annie, and 42nd Street all moved. Once Upon a Mattress moved around so much that wags proclaimed that it was touring New York. But back to the show at hand. As we explained in our introduction, shows have made it into this book for a variety of reasons, including groundbreaking subject matter, significant star turns, and notable longevity. Whatever its artistic merits, Grease has more than proved its phenomenal universal appeal and durability. We have to admit it. Grease and Broadway will always go together, like Rama Lama Lama King Ka-ding-a-ding, shoop boop shoo wada wada yippity boom da boom. Backstage, Adrienne Barbeau went to auditions dressed as the character Marty, but the creative team saw her as more of a Rizzo and she got the part. The original cast of Grease still has reunions every year. Tom Moore. Grease was Tom Moore's first Broadway show, and a highly auspicious debut it was. He went on to direct the musical Over Here, a big brassy show choreographed by Grease's Patricia Birch, featuring two of the three Andrews sisters and a supporting cast that includes Grease alumni John Travolta, Treat Williams, and Marilu Henner. Surprisingly, it would be Moore's last Broadway musical, though he has directed an especially wide range of dramatic and comedic fare. Two of his straight plays for Broadway, Division Street and the fascinating mega play Frankenstein, were undeserved flops. But Moore recovered with a hit in the somber, Pulitzer Prize-winning Night Mother. Heading to California, he became the first straight director of such television shows as L.A., Law, Mad About You, ER, and 30-something. Also directing many plays at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles. His last venture in New York, Carol Burnett's Broadway comeback Moon Over Buffalo, was not successful, but that was certainly not his fault. We hope that a small producer brings more back to Broadway at the helm of a big, splashy, entertaining musical. Grey Gardens opened November 2nd, 2006 at the Walter Kerr Theatre with 308 performances. Produced by East of Doheny, Staunch Entertainment, Rondell L. Wright, Mort Swinsky, Michael Alden, and Edwin W. Slosh. Produced in association with Playwrights Horizon. Book by Doug Wright, music by Scott Frankel, lyrics by Michael Corey. Based on the film Grey Gardens by David Malsley, Albert Maisley, Ellen Hovde, Muffy Meyer, and Susan Fromke. Musical director, Lawrence German. Musical orchestrated by Bruce Coughlin. Directed by Michael Grief. Musical staging by Jeff Calhoun. Scenic design by Alan Moyer. Costume design by William Ivy Long. Lighting design by Peter Karsovsky. Synopsis. The East Hampton, New York estate of the Bouvier family is abuzz with activity as members of the socially elite Beale family prepare for a party announcing young Edith's engagement to Joseph Kennedy, Jr. As they await the arrival of the family patriarch, the debutante and her mother, the eccentric Edith Bouvier Beale, begin to reveal their dysfunctional relationship. After the highly competitive Edith plants seeds of doubt in the mind of her daughters, intended, young Edith's marriage is called off, and she leaves Grey Gardens, vowing never to return. Flash forward 32 years. The mansion is now dilapidated and overrun with cats, and the two Ediths live in solitary squalor. Her eccentricity now bordering on insanity. Little Edie is yearning to escape, but deep down knows that she and her mother are inextricably linked as two peas in a pod. Little Edie Beale, or Edith Bouvier Beale, Christine Ebersole. Edith Bouvier Beale, Mary Louise Wilson. J.V. Major Bouvier, or Norman Vincent Peale, John McMartin. Joseph Patrick Kennedy Jr. and Jerry, Matt Kavanaugh. Young Little Edie Beale, Erin Davey. George Gould Strong, Bob Stillman. Brooks Sr. and Brooks Jr., Michael Potts. Lee Bouvier, Kelsey Fowler. Jacqueline Jackie Bouvier, Sarah Hyland. Featuring one of the most exciting and haunting scores of the last 15 years, Grey Gardens gives hope to true fans of musical theater. With aching, witty, and richly textured music by composer Scott Frankel and clever and touching lyrics, which, we might add, not a single false rhyme, by Michael Corey, the show seems, on paper, one of the most unlikely subjects for a serious musical, right up there with Sweeney Todd and Pacific Overtures. In fact, the show has much in common with another Stephen Sondheim musical, Sunday in the Park with George. Both were nurtured and developed at Off-Broadway's Playwright Horizons. Both featured very distinct first and second acts, separately by the passing of many years. In each play's second act, the actors play the offspring of their first act characters. Finally, both shows speculate dramatically on real people and historical events, although the events of Grey Gardens' second act are not speculative. They stick closely to the particulars of the film documentary upon which the play is based. In telling the story of the highly dysfunctional two Ediths, the creators were not content simply to musicalize the cult hit film. Rather, they created a prequel as an opening act, examining the extremely complicated mother-daughter dynamic at a crucial turning point. After a brief prelude set in 1973, the first act unfolds some 30 years prior to when the documentary was made, on an important afternoon at the family's East Hampton mansion. The opening number, the 5:15, brilliantly sets up the action, introduces the main characters, and, with its pushed down beat and syncopation, creates a slightly uneasy undercurrent. By the time Big Edie performs "Will You," the first act closer that comes close to the beauty and of the best Romberg or Fremle, the audience is hooked, especially as they know what is in store in Act 2. People who have criticized the first act as mere pastiche and the second as a simple recreation of the documentary were clearly not paying attention. For the piece, particularly with some fine-tuning after its off-Broadway run, was much, much more than just a camp fest. It gave two actresses opportunities to play the juiciest, most complex roles of their careers. Mary Louise Wilson, a superb character actress since the early 1960s, who co-created her own role of a lifetime in the Diana Vreeland bioplay Full Gallop, was eerie as the elderly Big Edie, alternately hilarious and cruel, and truly inspired in her second act number Jerry Likes Mike Horn. This was one of the battiest, most delicious odd moments in musical theater. A perfectly realized love songs for misfits and Mr. Snow for the 21st century. Above all, there was the performance of Christine Ebersole as Big Edie in Act 1 and Little Edie in Act 2. It's not overly extravagant to say that it was perhaps the greatest musical theater performance since Angela Lansbury in Sweeney Todd, stopping the second act cold minutes into it with the revolutionary costume for today. Ebersole had clearly delved so far into the character that her performance transcended impersonation. This was inspiration. In the last 15 minutes of Act 2, when the plot veers away from the documentary and into Little Edie's head with the 1-2 punch of the haunting around the world and the tortured paralysis of Another Winter in Summertown, constituted a sublime melding of great musical theater writing, direction, and acting. Note to the writing team of Frankel Corey Wright, to quote a lyrics from Sunday in the Park, give us more to see. Christine Ebersole. Christine Ebersole was a diva in the making for nearly 30 years, finally achieving the acclaim she richly deserved with her stunning dual performance in Grey Gardens. Born and raised in Chicago, Ebersole got her big break on Broadway as Ado Annie in the 1979 revival of Oklahoma. She took on another legendary role, this time as a soprano, is there anything her voice won't do, in the 1980 revival of Camelot, with Richard Burton reprising his original role as author. A season-long stint on Saturday Night Live followed, and after starring opposite former Oklahoma co-star Harry Groener in the flop Harrigan and Hart, Ebersole hightailed to LA, where she found steady but ultimately unsatisfying work on sitcoms. Heading back to New York to do the unsuccessful musical Paper Moon, she took on roles in concert versions of Allegro, Lady in the Dark, and A Connecticut Yankee as part of City Center's Encore series. In addition to winning her first Tony Award in the 2001 revival of 42nd Street, Ebersole has become the first-rate actress in straight plays, appearing in Stephen Sondheim's murder mystery Getting Away with Murder, and Broadway revivals of The Best Man, Dinner at 8, and Steel Magnolias. Guys and Dolls opened November 24th, 1950 at the 46th Street Theater with 1,200 performances. Produced by Fair and Martin, music and lyrics by Frank Loesser, book by Abe Burrows and Joe Swerling, based on a story and characters by Damon Runyon. Musical director, Irving Achtman. Musical arranged by George Bassman and Ted Royale. Vocal arrangements by Herbert Green and vocal direction by Herbert Green. Staged by George S. Kaufman. Dances and musical numbers staged by Michael Kidd. Scenic and lighting design by Joel Meisner. Costume design by Alvid Colt. Synopsis. Against the colorful backdrop of Times Square, a bunch of gamblers have a run-in at the Salvation Army, and Sky Masterson, an inveterate man about town, bets that he can woo the uptight Salvation Army lass Sarah Brown. Sky makes the wager with Nathan Detroit, a no-good Nick Sharpie who has been engaged for 14 years to showgirl Miss Adelaide, who has developed psychosomatic symptoms due to her perpetually unmarried status. Sky manages to get Sarah to go to Havana with him by promising her that he'll fill up her Save a Soul mission with sinners. And once in Cuba, Sarah gets stone cold drunk while resolutely refusing to fall in love with Sky. In the meantime, Nathan capitalizes on Sarah's absence by holding his permanent floating crap game right in the mission headquarters. By curtain's fall, everything is straightened up, and the two couples find themselves wed. Cast: Sky Masterson, Robert Alda. Miss Adelaide, Vivian Blaine. Nathan Detroit, Sam Levin. Miss Sarah Brown, Isabel Bigley. Arvid Abernathy, Pat Rooney Sr. Big Jewel, B.S. Pulley. Nicely Johnson, Stubby Kale. Harry the Horse, Tom Petty. Benny South Street, Johnny Silver. It makes sense that Broadway presents the heart and soul of New York, that the city itself, with all its accompanying glamour and sleaze, has served as an inspiration and setting for many musical comedies. Guys and Dolls is a valentine to the Times Square of Damon Runyon, with its host colorful characters and exotic locations, exotic at least to the tourists who flocked to see the show, and the denizens of Guys and Dolls couldn't be confused with people from anywhere else in the world. Their manners, slang, dress, and actions all spoke to the land of nightclubs, floating crap games, and blintzes. Although hundreds of other shows have been set in Manhattan, few have been so creatively inspired by the Big Apple. The world of Guys and Dolls was the world of Damon Runyon, creator of the original short stories upon which the show was based. Like the Sholem Aleichem stories that formed the basis of Fiddler on the Roof, Runyon's world was based in reality but featured characters and situations bigger than life, often incorporating subtle twists of offering a moral in the bargain. Both writers reveled in the humanity of their subjects, for Runyon and Alkheim believed in the essential goodness of people, although they skirted stereotypes, neither ever denigrated his characters. Like Alkheim, Runyon knew of what people he spoke and wrote about his own world. Runyon was a fixture at Lindy's restaurant, immortalized as Mindy's in his stories and newspaper columns. He recorded and celebrated shows of the streets, and Guys and Dolls lyrics made use of the unique phraseology of characters like Harry the Horse, Big Jewel, Nicely Johnson, and Joey Biltmore. In this world, guys are men and dolls are women, and other gender labels include bum, broad, John, and Jane. Can do meant that a horse could win a race, and the morning line was found in the well-known newspaper The Racing Form. Shooters were men who placed craps with their bundle, the amount they had to bet with, and free tickets to shows were chine because the tickets had holes punched in them, making them resemble Chinese coins. Money was potatoes, and a guy tore a herring at his favorite deli. The slang certainly didn't make the songs or dialogue difficult to understand, and added much in terms of ambience and characterization. Runyon made up some of the slang, but even those words felt true to the period and personalities. For his stories are based on such real denizens of the square as Titanic Thompson, the model for Sky Masterson. This honesty and exactness made Guys and Dolls one of the few shows that creates a complete and realistic world. The world of the Biltmore Garage and the Save a Soul mission is in some ways just as foreign and exotic as the Siam of The King and I or Morocco of Desert Song. But those shows have modern dialogue and characters who behave such contemporary audiences do. Perhaps the only shows that approach Guys and Dolls is in creating a unique and specific universe are Oklahoma and West Side Story, two other shows that made exquisite use of colloquial speech. The brilliance of the score and book are deservedly revered elements in the success of Guys and Dolls, one of the most performed musicals in Broadway history. But above all else, Runnion's language in the mortar that binds all the elements together into magical musical comedy world. Backstage, Billy Rose invested $10,000 in Guys and Dolls, but when he found out Abe Burrows was going to replace Yo Swirling's libretto, he demanded his money back. Feuer and Martin went through 11 writers before settling on Joe Swirling. When Swirling's script was deemed inappropriate, Abe Burrows replaced him, but Swirling's contract demanded credits whether or not any of his work was retained. Frank Loesser. One of the most chameleon-like of all songwriters, Frank Loesser hit Broadway after a long career as a Hollywood lyricist, where he wrote lyrics for such greats as Hoagy Carmichael, Jules Stein, and Burton Lane. After an early review, he wrote his first book show, Where's Charlie?, and scored a standard with Once in Love with Amy. His second show was the smash hit and instantly classic Guys and Dolls, still as fresh today as it was in the 1950s, and perhaps the most admired show ever by fellow musical comedy writers. Every song is perfectly musicalized character moment. Is a perfectly musicalized character moment. His most ambitious undertaking was The Most Happy Fella, a 3-act piece of near operatic proportions, followed by his only flop to reach Broadway, Green Willow. Loesser's final Broadway show, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, won the Pulitzer, the Tony, and practically every other award short of the Medal of Freedom. Pleasures and Palaces, another ambitious project with a mostly wonderful score, seemed cursed from the start. After all, it was Bob Fosse's only out-of-town closer as well. He was working on senior discretion himself at the time of his death in 1969, and it was finally produced at the Arena Stage in Washington in early 2004. Although he wrote many standards, Loesser's greatest legacy in songs such as Make a Miracle from Where's Charlie?, Marry the Man Today from Guys and Dolls, and Cinderella Darling from How to Succeed, with the highly unusual structures, they revealed an artist eager to stretch himself with every new project. Nathan Lane. Nathan Lane is that rarest of things in today's world, a truly bankable Broadway star. After a musical debut as Sheeta Rivera's son in Merlin, starring musical comedy genius Doug Henning, as Lane remarked, Henning's greatest magic trick was making the audience disappear. He appeared as Toad in Wind in the Willows. Another flop. Building a name for himself in off-Broadway plays such as The Common Pursuit and the Lisbon Traviata, Lane finally found himself in a hit musical. Directed by Jerry Sachs, whose sense of pace and busyness was well suited to both Lane and Miss Adelaide, Faith Prince, the 1992 revival of Guys and Dolls, found Lane and Prince, cast as the traditional secondary couple, garnering most of the attention with their comic trapeze act. Next up for Lane was the slave Pseudolus in the revival of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, also directed by Sachs, a role that lent itself to the self-deprecating wisecracks and facility of the ad-lib. He appeared with Victor Garber in several workshops and the most recent Sondheim project, and that point titled Wise Guys, before winning a second Tony for The Producers, a show whose runaway success, at least with Lane and Matthew Broderick on the marquee, was among the most unstoppable in recent times. Like most clowns, he had an admitted dark side, oceans of self-doubt underpinning his great comic gifts. His latest venture finds Lane wearing multiple hats, as both star and adapter of Burt Shevelov's original book, The Frogs, reuniting him with producers, director Susan Stroman, and Forum composer Stephen Sondheim. Guilty pleasures. All right, you can come out from behind the veil of shame, stand up, chest out, and proclaim, "My name is blank, and I like Bajor." Listen, you're not alone. What is it that we're living for? To quote Lee Adams in The Guilty Pleasures Applause. Not the Cradle of Rock or Assassins. And face it, the really greatest of the greats, Fiddler on the Roof or My Fair Lady, aren't suitable for standing in your living room on your BVDs for waving your arms like a man as you conduct the original cast album. You'll get a much bigger grin on your face, hopping around, making faces, and singing at the top of your lungs. Nobody throw those balls from Whoop Up. Everyone's who's who from Happy Hunting. 5 growing boys from Minnie's Boys. Addie's at It Again from I Had a Ball. Desert Moon from Golden Rainbow. Or Where is the Tribe from Me from Bajor. We just love that all-American 100% pasteurized processed cheese, and the cheesier the better. Don't get us wrong. These are perfectly good songs, but they don't have any, shall we say, depth. And they have to be either really catchy, There Goes the Neighborhood from I Had a Ball, or really maudlin, The Game of Love from Happy Hunting. Can you believe Frank Gorshin, Anita Gillette, and Julie Wilson all jockeyed to sing I Only Wanna Laugh from Jimmy? We've even heard tell of an audience whose audition piece was the overture of Jimmy, adding the lyrics into the song as the songs flew by. Somehow, she didn't get cast. Listen, the people who wrote these songs had talent. Moose Charlap might have written the guilty pleasure Whoop Up, but he also composed wonderful music for Peter Pan. Sammy Fain is a distinguished composer of many standards, including I'll Be Seeing You, but he also gave us Ankle Away. And please understand, though many guilty pleasures were flops, they weren't all bad shows. Bad shows include such dogs as Seventh Heaven, Her First Roman, Christine, and Victor Victoria. Paris Makes Me Horny. Need we say more? So, crank up the stereo and let her rip with Walk Like a Sailor from Ankles Away, and play the album over and over again until the needle, CDs don't have that nice, crackly, well-worn sound, digs through the vinyl of your mother, or your wife, or your boyfriend, or neighbor, screams at the top of their lungs, "What are you doing up there?" Then you know you're really celebrating a guilty pleasure. Gypsy. Opened May 21st, 1959 at the Broadway Theatre with 702 performances. Produced by David Merrick and Leland Hayward. Book by Arthur Lawrence. Music by Joel Stein. Lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. Based on the memories of Gypsy Rose Lee. Musical director Milton Rosenstock. Music orchestrated by Sid Vammen and Robert Ginsler. Dance arrangements by John Kander and Betty Wahlberg. Additional dance music by Betty Wahlberg. Directed and choreographed by Jerome Robbins. Scenic design by Joe Milesner. Lighting design by Joe Milesner. Costume design by Raoul Pen-de-Bois. Synopsis. Ruthless stage mother Rose Hovick propels her 2 children, June and Louise, through the dying years of vaudeville. Along the way, Rose connives and wheedles to keep the act alive. But when June finally abandons both mother and act, Rose is left with the musically untalented Louise. Rose and Louise, now on a downward spiral, eventually land in the tawdry world of burlesque, where Louise unexpectedly finds her niche and becomes a star stripper, Gypsy Rose Lee. In the end, having achieved at least half her goals, Rose is left alone, having alienated everyone. Cast. Rose, Ethel Merman. Louise, Sandra Church. Herbie, Jack Klugman. June, Lane Bradbury. Tulsa, Paul Wallace. Mazeppa, Faith Dane. Electra, Shotzi Foley. Tessitura, Maria Karnilova. Baby June, Jacqueline Mayrow. Baby Louise, Karen Moore. Pop, Irving Harmon. Agnes, Marilyn Cooper. Uncle Jocko, Mr. Goldstone. Mort Marshall. Weber, Joe Silver. Kringoline, Cigar, Lonely Louis, Miss Cratchit's, Peg Murray. Considered by many to be the ultimate Broadway musical, Gypsy is an ultra-shrewd, deeply felt spectacle of life and show business. Life and show business. Subtitled A Musical Fable, it romanticizes life up and down the ladder of vaudeville and burlesque. Every character in Gypsy desperately wants something, and it's that clash of needs that gives the show its dramatic drive. Its story, loosely based on the memories of stripper, actress, author Gypsy Rose Lee, follows the good and bad fortunes of Rose and her two daughters, June and Louise, as they live out Rose's dreams of stardom in the theater. Gypsy, a rare tragicomic musical, doesn't remotely turn out neatly packaged at the final curtain. The 11 o'clock number, Rose's Turn, is as dramatic as anything in grand opera, a true aria for Broadway. While the entire production team, including producers David Merrick and Leland Hayward, composer Jules Stein, lyricist Stephen Sondheim, librettist Arthur Lawrence, director-choreographer Jerome Robbins, designer Roel de Pont-de-Bois, and Joe Milesner, and orchestrators Sid Beman and Robert Ginsler were at the top of the game, above all, it was Ethel Merman's performance of Rose that provided the backbone of Gypsy, constantly driving the show forward. Merman's powerhouse presence propelled the musical towards its conclusion, worthy of a Greek tragedy. Merman dispelled all criticism that she was simply a belter, a woman whose lungs were disproportionately large in comparison to her heart and her brain. As Rose, Merman's persona was perfectly captured by music and lyrics, allowing her to show off her expected brass as well as her all too seldom utilized sensitivity. In addition, Lawrence's libretto allowed Merman a rare opportunity to really act, enthralling audiences with the emotional tightrope walk of a decidedly unsympathetic character. Unfortunately, Merman would never again originate a musical character on Broadway. One other ingredient of Gypsy's success is worth noting, its legendary, thrilling overture. Jules Stein strongly believed in the power of the first notes heard by an audience, going so far as to handpick the pit musicians. Beginning with its trumpet fanfare of I Had a Dream motif, Gypsy's overture is one of the most recognizable elements in a production chock full of perfect theatrical moments. Gypsy provides a juicy star opportunity in Rose, making it the promised land for many actresses. After Merman, who played the entire Broadway run, came Angela Lansbury, first in London's West End in 1973, then on Broadway in 1974. Whereas Merman's Rose hurtled through life without reflection until her explosive moment of self-awareness at the end, Lansbury mined the psychological complexity under the surface of her vicarious pleasure, electrifying theatergoers with a particularly harrowing turn. Her sorrow and disillusionment in the last moments of the final scene with Louise, magnified by the theatrical magic of the revival's director, Arthur Lawrence, added yet another haunted layer to the character. Tyne Daly was the next Broadway Rose, giving the part a willful, single-minded core. In Daly's portrayal, the dream became obsession, as she pointed to the same spot in the balcony on the St. James every time her goal came into view. Daly had scant need for the subtle wiles of Lansbury's Rose, becoming a truly unstoppable force of nature, sometimes physically knocking down those who stood in her way. Most recently, Bernadette Peters undertook this dream role. Peters, without the imposing physicality of her predecessors, explored the coy manipulativeness of the character, creating a sensuous minx of a Rose. That is, the most famous of female characters in Broadway musical, who could hold her own with Shakespeare's fatally flawed creations, can be interpreted by such disparate group of women without growing stale as the years pass. It is a finale, lasting testament to the brilliance and universality of Gypsy. Jules Stein. Composer Jules Stein had a prodigious output unequaled by the contemporaries and a staggering versatility and melodic fecundity. After years, after early days as a Hollywood tunesmith, Stein and lyricist Sammy Kahn attempted to write for Broadway, and their second show, their first, Glad to See Ya, had closed out of town. High Button Shoes, starring Phil Silvers and Annette Fabre, scored a hit. Stein again hit pay dirt with Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, working with Leo Robin as lyricist. Though it was only his third score for the theater, we see in the song Little Girl from Little Rock Styles' uncanny knack for perfectly tailoring songs to match the unique charms of star Carol Channing. Through the 1950s and 60s, his stock rose as he teamed often with longtime collaborators Betty Comden and Adolph Green. Their scores for Peter Pan, Bells Are Ringing, and Do Re Mi were in perfect step with the personas of Martin, Julie Holliday, and Phil Silvers, respectively. In 1964, the smash Funny Girl became Stein's longest-running hit. With lyrics by Bob Merrill, the powerhouse songs People and Don't Rain on My Parade are so brilliantly tailored to Barbra Streisand's range and intensity that the show remains one of the few major musicals without a major revival. Not today. With the rise of the rock musical in the 1970s, Broadway seemed to let Jules Stein down. He dismissed the success of the British Invaders of 1980s and 90s and proclaimed himself the greatest living American composer. And he was right. At the 1993 opening of Miss Saigon, during the show's ballad Why God Why, he turned to his date and proclaimed, "You gotta be kidding me. They stole that melody from There's a Small Hotel. Even at that late date, you couldn't put one over him." Arthur Laurents. In 1957, playwright Arthur Laurents, along with Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, and Jerome Robbins, sent shockwaves through the musical theater with his startling work on West Side Story. After reteaming with Sondheim and Robbins on Gypsy, a 1-2 punch of amazing artistic scope of the three collaborators, Laurents directed the musical for the first time, I Can Get It For You Wholesale. By hiring the largely unknown Elliot Gould to carry the show and a young cabaret singer named Streisand with an odd yet undeniable charisma, Laurents showed bravery in his casting choices. This continued in his next Sondheim collaboration, the fascinating Anyone Can Whistle, starring musical theater neophytes Lee Remick, Angela Lansbury, and Harry Guardino. Do a Hero Waltz, a musicalization of his play Time of the Cuckoo, was, despite some lovely songs, by most accounts a miserable experience for those involved. In 1973, he reunited with Angela Lansbury, directing her in the West End premiere of Gypsy, which later came to Broadway and proved a great triumph for both director and star. In 1983, he directed the smash musical version of the French farce La Cage aux Folles, musicalized by Jerry Herman and Harvey Fierstein. Another revival of Gypsy, starring the gifted Tyne Daly, made a hit all over again, cementing the title one of the finest books ever written for a musical. Laurents' fierce intellect, strong societal beliefs, and great craftsmanship have made him one of the mammoth talents of the American theater. Backstage. In the out-of-town tryout, the song Mama's Talking Soft was sung in counterpoint to Small World, as Baby June and Baby Louise, perched high in the flies of the theater, watched their mother trap an agent in the one fell swoop. When one of the young actresses became so afraid of the height, she became hysterical, and the song, along with the wonderful illustration of the girl's awareness, was cut. When the creators approached the real-life June Havoc, to sign a release allowing them to depict her by name, she initially refused, and the character was temporarily renamed Baby Claire. Havoc soon realized that everyone would recognize her as the character anyway, and she relented. During rehearsals, the name change so confused the cast they often referred to her as Baby Clue.